Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and if you've listened to Point of View, you know that we're really concerned about the spiritual nature of the next generation, and so we've tried to do many things to identify that. One, of course, this huge survey that we've been talking about, over 3,000 individuals, which again demonstrates some things we've already known before: the need to pass the spiritual baton from one generation to the next. We've also done different kind of programming. We have, for example, the Millennial Roundtable. Another one will take place next week, in which we have millennials around the table talking about their faith and how they can begin to develop that in their own generation as we reach out to Generation Y and now even Generation Z. So we're going to spend some time today talking about that as we talk about this new book, Jesus Followers, Real Life Lessons for Igniting Faith in the Next Generation. But let me just, as a program note, mention that next hour we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. A lot of information coming out now from the whistleblower for Facebook. First, a speech and an interview that took place in 60 Minutes. Then, of course, all of her presentation and Congress. So we're going to talk about that. What about this crackdown from the Department of Justice about parents that have been protesting some of the things that are happening in the schools, whether it's critical race theory or explicit sex education? We know a little bit more about that as well. And one that just came out today, now a leaked grant proposal actually showing that Chinese and American scientists really were planning and really trying to create a novel coronavirus. We are, of course, dealing with a global pandemic due to some of that, so we have a lot to cover in the next hour. But I've been looking forward to this interview, one, because one of the authors, Anne Graham Lotz, has been with us, but also her daughter, Rachel-Ruth Lotz Wright, is with us as well. I've learned a tremendous amount from her in terms of this book as I've had a chance to go through it. So let's, if we can, bring them to the conversation today. Anne Graham Lotz, no stranger to the Point of View listening audience. Of course, New York Times bestseller, as well as listed by the New York Times as one of the most influential evangelists of her generation. We've talked with her in the past about the Daniel prayer, the Daniel key, fixing my eyes on Jesus, so many different things. Of course, has 3 grown children and 3 grandchildren. And Anne, welcome back to Point of View.
Kerby, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. So I always enjoy talking with you, and just you listing all of those current events that you're dealing with. That's one reason my daughter and I have such a burden to get Christian parents to put their focus on making sure their children are grounded in their faith and passing that faith to the next generation, because that's the only thing that's going to see them through those things that you were talking about.
Well, again, we tend to talk about those ideas. I highly recommend this book to everyone. It's 28 chapters published by Multnomah. We'll break it down. It actually has 4 different sections. But first of all, let me go to Rachel-Ruth Lotz, who first of all leads a online weekly Bible study through Angel, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. And of course, she lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, with her 3 daughters and husband. And Rachel-Ruth, if nothing else, I got to know you a lot better by reading this book. As a matter of fact, when I picked up the book, I noticed somebody I've known for decades, Tony Evans, endorsed the book, and I thought, oh, isn't that nice? And then I find out that when you were at Baylor, you were driving from Waco to Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship to sit under his teaching. I thought, boy, that's pretty impressive. So welcome back to Point of View.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you. And yes, I love Tony Evans' church. He is one of the all-time greats. So that was a wonderful blessing for me.
Well, Ann, let me come to the first chapter because you talk about the fact, and I love track, and I've used this illustration many times before, of passing the baton. We've watched the Olympics recently, and sometimes if you don't pass the baton, you lose the race. And there is a real desire to pass the spiritual baton from one generation to the next. And that, I think, has become a really chronic issue that we've identified, because it is fair to say that Generation Y and Generation Z probably are the least religious generation.
So something's wrong, isn't it? Something is wrong if we haven't passed it effectively to our own children and grandchildren. And I think one of the things that may be wrong, Kerby, is that we're not intentional about it. We're just sort of expecting that if we raise them in church or we send them to a Christian school, somehow that's going to happen. But I think with all the pressures that they're facing today and all the temptations, it takes more than that. And actually, in my own home, one of the things that prompted this book is people come to me and they say, Ann, how was it that your grandparents passed that faith to your parents? Parents pass it to you, and you've passed it to your children, and my children have passed it to the grandchildren. How is that? Is that just luck? Is it just because it's Billy Graham's family up and down? But it's not. It's an intentional effort that's on the part of my grandparents, my parents, on myself and my husband, and now Rachel-Ruth and her husband with their children. And so we've written this book just to encourage people that sharing examples from our family, how it should have been done or how it shouldn't have been done. It's not, we're not perfect, that's for sure, but just to share examples that maybe we could give people ideas and encourage them, inspire them to focus on, with intentionality, passing that truth to the next generation so that they grasp it for themselves by faith. And if they don't, Kerby, then if we don't pass it on, who will? And would it be lost in this generation?
That's right. We don't want to outsource it to the world. We really don't want to outsource it even to the youth pastor. We really want to focus on that. Let me just mention that, as I mentioned, 28 chapters. Part 1, our witness. Part 2, our worship. Part 3, our walk. And Part 4, our work. And also, in the end of each one of the chapters, creating a legacy of witness, some questions, as well as some Bible verses. So if you find yourself saying, I'd like to pass this on not only to my family, but maybe you're a pastor or a youth leader or a Sunday school teacher, small group leader, this is really designed to be able to educate others and encourage others to be intentional about this. And if I could for just a minute, Rachel-Ruth, we just the other day had an interview with a father and a son. And it was interesting to talk with a son because he was growing up in the mission field. And when he was in Austria, the only people he knew were Christians. Either you were a really dedicated Christian or a very secular world. But then they moved to Atlanta, and he dealt with the issue of cultural Christianity, where there were people claiming to be Christians, but they really weren't living the Christian life. Your generation, probably more so than any others, are saying, if Christianity is true, I need to see it lived out in your lives, and I don't really see it. Did you ever face that?
Yes, I did, especially growing up in the Bible Belt. And there were so many people that said they were Christians, but I would look at the way they lived outside of church, and I thought, well, that's not being a Christian. That's not knowing Jesus the way that I do. And I made a decision when I was in 9th grade. I told the Lord I wanted to live for him no matter what. I didn't want to be like the world. When I saw all my friends turning away from Jesus, I wanted to stay true to the Lord. And the Lord brought a lot of tough things into my life. And he did that, I know now, just to strengthen my relationship with him, to make me turn to him and draw near to him. But I wanted to be authentic, and that's what I've seen in my parents and my grandparents. They were authentic for the Lord. They loved Jesus in everything they did. And so I too wanted that faith for myself, and I wanted to be an authentic example of Jesus and not be one of these wishy-washy people. I serve the Lord on Sundays, but not any of the other days, and yes. I wanted to all the time.
I've heard the word authenticity a lot from the generations that we've been talking about. We'll come back and continue our conversation about Jesus followers right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the crime rate is up in many cities, so maybe it's time to consider a solution rarely suggested. Let's see what faith-based organizations and people of faith can do. The evidence is that it can reduce the crime rate and the recidivism rate in our prisons. This is the argument Baylor University criminologist Byron Johnson makes in his book, More God, Less Crime. Sadly, most social scientists and even criminologists seem reluctant to make the connection between faith and the impact religious perspectives could have on America's crime problem. Dr. Johnson believes that a faith-based ministry or message doesn't resonate with most social scientists. Many are even hostile to religion, as demonstrated by the opening chapter in his book entitled The Last Acceptable Prejudice. Dr. Johnson also says that faith-based organizations were merely tolerated within the criminal justice system. In some places, they're seen as valuable and even helpful. In other jurisdictions, they're viewed with suspicion. This is unfortunate since the criminal justice system is facing cutbacks and shrinking budgets. Prison ministries like Bill Glass, Prison Fellowship, and Kairos Prison Ministry can provide people and programs that can make a difference. Faith-based organizations of all kinds can provide volunteers and educators to help with programs in life skills and adult education. The book is full of positive examples of what can happen when Christians get involved in their local community. He tells the story of the Boston Miracle, where police and pastors work together to break the stranglehold gangs had in the community. He also talks about the mission of the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise and Violence-Free Zones. He even gives practical advice on the important issues of prisoner reentry and aftercare. Most importantly, he provides a review of the literature so that churches and faith-based organizations can show skeptics that the title of the book is true: More God, Less Crime. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Ann Graham Lotz and Rachel-Ruth Lotz Wright, and they are the authors of this new book, Jesus Followers. It is just out. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but in case you cannot, we have a link to it so you can get it both in hardback and Kindle. Of course, we have a link to their website, so all sorts of great information as we walk our way through that. And Ann, I thought we'd come back because Rachel-Ruth was talking about authenticity, and lately I've been doing more interviews than actually doing interviews. I've been giving interviews because the surveys just come out, and it's amazing how many times the word authenticity comes out. I want authentic Christianity. This is a generation saying, you know, I'm not going to actually commit myself to a Christian idea if I don't see it lived out in somebody's life. And then she talked about some of the hard times. Well, you've lost your father, you've lost your husband, you've dealt with cancer, as well as some of the things Rachel-Ruth has had to deal with. That's the time when sometimes people really can look at you and say, okay, I really want to see whether or not you actually live out what you believe. And that's, I think, part of how we pass the spiritual baton on from one generation to the next.
You know, Kerby, you're exactly right. And somehow we don't connect the dots when something bad happens. But Peter told us in the New Testament not to be surprised at that fiery trial that comes, because it's there to reveal the glory of Jesus in us, which is his character. And so the difficult things I've been through, of course, my children saw behind closed doors. They saw me in private, and they saw the way I genuinely was handling it. And so I have to be genuine I can't put it on, and so my relationship with Jesus started, and I know we've talked about this before, but when I was a young girl, and I came to the cross by faith and told God I was sorry for all the wrong things I'd done and asked him to forgive me, to come into my heart, and I believe he did. I was born again into God's family, but that was the first step, and then I had to grow in my relationship with him, which is Bible reading and applying what the Bible says to my life, living it out, praying, learning how to get answers to prayer, learning how to hear the whispers of the Spirit as I read the Bible, and then serving him in obedience. And so that's been a lifetime, and God is so good, Kerby, because he doesn't, I wasn't in my teens when I was diagnosed with cancer or at some other point, and I know different people are listening, and they have been, but for myself, I feel like the Lord allowed my faith to develop to a point that he knew I could handle, with his help, I could handle what he was allowing to come into my life. And one of the things happened, of course, it just came so boom, 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 and I think that makes hard things even harder when they just come in a wave and one after another. But the Lord is sufficient, and if he's not sufficient for those difficult times, then I'm not sure I would want to follow him either. But he is sufficient. He is ever present. He is faithful to take care of us, to give you strength for the day that you have, to bring you through. I love the preposition through. He brings you through that valley of the shadow. He brings you through the deep waters. He brings you through the fire. And I've experienced that. And so my children, I saw it in my parents, by the way, just my father, especially at the end of his life when he couldn't do anything. He was in bed. He couldn't walk. He couldn't see. He was fed. And yet he still had the peace of God in his heart, still could pray, and my mother in pain, Rachel-Ruth writes about both of them and writes about my mother living in chronic pain, never lost the joy of the Lord. And I saw in them that authentic faith. I saw it in my grandparents. Rachel-Ruth is dear because she says she's seen it in myself and my husband, and then I see it in her and all the things that she's been through. And her three girls have seen it, Kerby, because each one of them are Jesus followers. They've each one put their faith in Jesus.
One of the chapters is about making the most of every opportunity. And by the way, I might just mention that I was also delighted by the number of pictures of you and your family. But one of those is you reading to your girls. But it reminded me of the Shema in the Old Testament, because you should teach your kids while you speak to them, when you sit in your house, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, when you rise up. There are times in which, of course, we have our family devotions, and that's certainly difficult when they're young, because I call it family devotions with the young and restless. But most of the teaching is really happening when you're playing tennis, when you're driving in the car, when they ask you a difficult question over breakfast. And that's really the theme I picked up from your book, that you, in a sense, have to be intentional every single day. And it's not just those times when you have maybe a family devotional, right?
It's a 24/7. So you don't add Jesus to your life. He is your life. And that's he should saturate us. So and that is shown by the way we live out his word and our relationship with him, and our children see that. And I've seen it in Rachel-Ruth, and I've loved the stories that she's written, because she's captured some of those precious moments, and some of them very funny. Some of them will make you cry. Some of them are convicting. Some of them encouraging. But she captures those moments that have lessons to them. It's not just a story to satisfy somebody's curiosity about what goes on in the Lotz and Graham households. It has a spiritual lesson, and she's very sensitive, and she's understands what the Spirit is trying to teach her and us through some of these stories that she's drawn from our family.
Well, Rachel-Ruth, let's see if we can talk about some of those stories. But first of all, let me just commend you for being such a good writer and remembering some of this. But I wanted to give you a little more time, since we pushed you up against the break last time, and give you a chance to maybe share one or two of those stories that illustrate how, again, the idea of really being intentional and passing the spiritual baton from one generation to the next certainly went from your mother, but now is going to you and your children as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the one that comes to my mind that I love was when I was younger. I think I was probably like 8 or 9, and I had done something to upset my sister, and and she was chasing me through the house, and I slammed the back door, which is a glass door. I slammed it on her, and I heard it shatter.
Yes.
And I ran to my mom's station wagon and climbed in and hid because I wanted to get away, and I knew I was going to get in trouble. And sure enough, they called me, and my mom sent me to my room, and then I heard my dad coming up the stairs, and I was just terrified that I was going to get it. You know, I'm going to get punished. This is terrible. And my dad walks in, and he sits down, and he was like, Rach. He always called me Rach, and he said, you deserved to get punished for what you did, but today I'm going to teach you about grace. And I looked at him, I was like, what? And he said, instead of punishing you, I'm going to take you to get some ice cream. And I said, you're going to do what? And he said, this is just a picture of what Jesus did for us and the way that he extended grace in our lives when we deserve punishment for our sin, for the wrong things that we've done. Instead of us having to be punished for that, Jesus stepped in our place, and he died on the cross to take that punishment on himself so that then we can be free from our sin. And I never forgot it. It made such an impact on me. And I can't even remember if we went and got ice cream, but I just remember that was it made such an impact. And I did it with my girls when they were growing up, and just to teach them the same thing. But it's in the everyday. It's when we're going through different things with our kids, different circumstances. That's when we want to step in and give them an application, show them, teach them about God's word and whatever situation you're going through at the moment. And so it's not just when you're sitting down at night, okay, we're going to do family devotions and sit down. It should be all the time. Like, you're always thinking, how can I minister to my kids? How can I encourage them? How can I lead them back to God's word in this situation? And so that like we keep saying, so that you're intentional with your walk with the Lord, and also always thinking about your kids are watching you, and you can learn, teach them these wonderful principles just in everyday circumstances.
So well said. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we have a lot more to cover. And this is the new book out called Jesus Followers, Real Life Lessons for Igniting Faith in the Next Generation. And when you think about this, you can't expect the church to counteract everything in the world. If you look at the Kaiser Family Foundation surveys that have been out for a couple of years, they recognize that the average young person probably spends 10 hours a day in front of a screen. That could be a computer screen, a video screen, a movie screen, could be their cell phone or whatever. Let's just assume that number is right. It's very high for some Christian kids and very low for others. But nevertheless, just 10 hours a day, multiply that 7 times, 70 hours a week, and we expect a pastor to counteract that with a, 45-minute sermon? Guess who wins? Oh, the world does. But there's another antidote to that, and that's the parents that have such a profound influence in their children. And I was noticing, as a matter of fact, this book has already become the #1 bestseller for grandparents. So I thought that's kind of interesting. And so this is a book, whether you're a parent or a grandparent, you can certainly learn some great lessons. So we are privileged to have with us today Ann Graham Lotz, as well as Rachel-Ruth Wright, and we will continue our conversation with them. You can find out a lot more information on our website. And let me just mention, for those of you in Dallas, tomorrow night we have former Governor Mike Huckabee with us, building a legacy dinner. We have a banner there, and if you'd like to attend with us, I think we actually have a few open spots. So if you'd like to be with me and Governor Mike Huckabee tomorrow night, go to the website, pointofview.net. It's also a place to go to find this book, and we'll be back right after this.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again as we talk about this new book, Jesus Followers, Real-Life Lessons for Igniting Faith in the Next Generation. Anne Graham Lotz and Rachel-Ruth Lotz Wright. They are the authors. They're with me, and this is such a great book, and it's full of inspiration, some really powerful stories as well. And as I said, about 200 pages, 28 chapters broken into 4 sections. And Rachel-Ruth, let me come to you for just a minute, because whenever I announce days ahead of time that we're going to have Anne Graham Lotz on, of course, you know what they want me to ask. That is, how's she doing with her health and, of course, the loss of her husband, those kinds of things. But I mentioned that you were going to be there as well. The question everybody wants me to ask, and I don't always try to ask the obvious questions, but this is one. With a grandfather by the name of Billy Graham, a grandmother by the name of Ruth Bell Graham, and a mother, Anne Graham Lotz, what was it like? And more importantly, was there ever a time when you just felt like there was an enormous amount of pressure and a lot of eyes on you as you were growing up?
Well, I love having my grandparents. My grandparents didn't know anything different. So my grandfather, even though he was up on stage and everyone saw
We're having a little trouble with that phone, so let me see. Maybe, Ann, you could speak to that issue. I hope your phone connection's a little better than Rachel-Ruth's right now. Okay, maybe we've lost everybody. Well, we'll see what we can do to get them back in. And so I think as soon as somebody gives me the high... There we go.
It's breaking up.
Yes, everything's breaking up. Well, I'll tell you what, let's just redial those phones and we'll see what we can do. We were doing fine until a few minutes ago. And again, while they're doing that, let me just mention that this is a book which is, of course, published by our good friends at Multnomah, 200 pages, 28 chapters, which gets into this. But, you know, for a lot of people, we just sort of raise our kids on autopilot. You know, as they say sometimes, Jesus is just sort of like an afterthought. And the real focus on this book, in large part, is really an attempt to try to do what they can to educate all of us about how we can be intentional. Might just mention there's some incredible endorsements coming from people like Jim Daly, president of Focus on the Family, Richard Blackaby, of course I mentioned Dr. Tony Evans, just to mention a few right there, as well as John Ankerberg and Greg Laurie and Tom and Joanne Doyle been on the program with us, and a variety of others. And so these are just some attempts to get you thinking about what you need to do to begin to not only raise your children, but maybe even your grandchildren. And so this is why we wanted to cover this book today. And while we're waiting for that, let me just mention that just as we went to the break, I did say for those of you in the Dallas area, we almost always, when we have an event, usually have it completely full. But we have an opening if you would like to join us. This will be at the Hilton Anatole Hotel, Building a Legacy Dinner. Now, there is an expense, but if you want to go to the website right now, which is pointofview.net, one of the things you will find is that you can click on the button that says register. That'll give you an opportunity if you would like to join us, and we'd love to set you at a table. And of course, we have a chance to hear from the former governor of the state of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, so I'm looking forward to that opportunity. It's called Building a Legacy Dinner. You might be wondering why we're doing it. Well, we are now up to our 49th year in the broadcast of Point of View. Marlon Maddox started it in 1972. No, I wasn't around back then, but here we are on the 49th anniversary, and next year will be the 50th anniversary. And so we have former member of Congress Michelle Bachmann, who was also a presidential candidate. But anyway, Governor Mike Huckabee, former governor, will be with us tomorrow night. And if you in Dallas would like to join with us, that would be a great opportunity for us to do so. And we are having difficulty making connection to Anne Graham Lotz and Rachel-Ruth Lotz. So let me just mention that some of the things we are going to be talking about today, first of all, it has to do with the whistleblower. That's Frances Haugen, who actually first was on 60 Minutes and then actually gave testimony in Congress. What you have to understand is then she has been welcomed as an individual that really is courageous. You've got to understand that the kinds of things she's saying are going to probably be well received by the mainstream media. Matter of fact, one of the articles I've posted by Glenn Greenwald simply says that the Democrats and the media do not want to weaken Facebook. They just want to use this kind of testimony to actually increase the power of Facebook to censor. The whistleblower is a vital media and political asset because she advances their quest, he says, for greater control over online political discourse. course. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to, in the next hour, spend a little bit of time talking about discernment. It's a theme that we've talked about so often here on Point of View, because there is a real desire, I think, for us to make sure that you use your, if you will, analytical skills and your logic and maybe some other aspects of discernment to begin to figure this out. And when you first see her giving prominence and 60 Minutes and then given an opportunity to testify in front of Congress in the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, the first thing you should always begin to understand is that they're all on the same team. And so that, I think, is really important to understand. And this is why when she talks about some of the problems with what is going on with Facebook, many times she's using the example that she says about the fact that she really got involved with Facebook because she saw someone who was getting lost to misinformation on the internet. What's that misinformation? Oh, it's the kind of misinformation you wouldn't want people to have access to. And oftentimes misinformation is conservative views, Christian views, and those kinds of things. Of course, she talks about the fact that he was disillusioned with Bernie Sanders, then became radicalized. But nevertheless, the argument certainly that she is making is that Facebook sometimes doesn't censor out certain issues. It allows controversy to exist. That helps increase their financial revenue because more eyes are watching it, more individuals are reading it, and so as a result, that helps it with ad revenue. And so while that all may be true, and while some of the criticisms she made of Facebook are true, things we've talked about today here on Point of View and in past times as well, it also illustrates only so well that, as I said, they're all on the same team. And so we're going to, when we have some time next hour, get into this in a little bit more detail. But if you go to the website, you're going to see that we have posted a piece by Glenn Greenwald, which again gets into this whole issue of Facebook. Then we're going to get into a couple of other topics that we will address. One of those, of course, has been the discussion we had yesterday of the Department of Justice and the Attorney General and what is now being called a crackdown on parents. On the one hand, I think it is absolutely crucial that we do understand that there is some harassment, and I do also post a very good piece by David French called Personal Harassment is Out of Control, and that, I think, is going to be an issue that we will talk about next hour. But also, it is, I think, a reminder that anything that is seen as even critical of those individuals that serve on a school board, those individuals that serve in a city council, are also being seen as something that you want the FBI to investigate. And as some of the WAGs more recently have pointed out, there is certainly a real problem when at a time when crime seems to be at an all-time high, when we have 100 million to 200 million people crossing the border every single month, and some of those individuals themselves come from countries or come from backgrounds which would increase the crime level. You would think that the FBI would want to focus most of its time and attention on the crime problem that is unleashed on the American people in the inner cities, and now because of certain individuals, not all, but certain individuals crossing the border. But instead, this long and detailed memorandum, which comes from Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, instead focuses on parents who, to be fair, sometimes get a little bit too emotional and maybe issue too many statements or threats, that this is where you want to focus the time and attention of the FBI. And it's amazing to me the reaction and even the pushback that's come from a number of different quarters through that memorandum that was issued, and also through a very interesting series of statements that came from the National School Board Association. Some of the state school board associations say this is just unconscionable that you would refer to some of these parents expressing some concern about critical race theory, expressing concern about very almost pornographic kinds of presentations of sex in the public schools, that then you would see those individuals as the particular letter that went to the Attorney General, that indeed these should be labeled as domestic terrorists. So we'll come back and get into some of those issues as well. Apologize that we just had difficulty connecting up today. We're the last part with Ann Graham Lotz and Rachel-Ruth Lotz Wright, but we certainly have a lot more to cover here on Point of View, so that's what we will do. Thank you for joining us today. We will come back and spend just a little bit more time getting into some of these issues and including the information about this book, because even though we didn't finish the interview, I think you will really appreciate the book, Jesus Followers, Real Life Lessons for Igniting Faith in the Next Generation. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's get into some of the issues in the news. Apologize, we were not able to make another connection. Maybe we can do some more of that in the future, but if nothing else, you got a chance for at least a half an hour to hear about this book, which I think very highly of and would recommend it to you as well. Let's get back to some of the issues in the news, and I cannot tell you the number of times people have expressed their concern about a piece in the legislation that is being considered right now by Congress that would actually actually allow the IRS to look over your shoulder. And it relates very much to this booklet that we produced a while back called Privacy and Surveillance. When we talk about this, a lot of people say, well, I'm not a private person, I don't care. But we're not talking about just privacy in terms of what you would want to release to other individuals. We are recognizing now that once that information is out there of who you donated to, where you spent your money, various forces can sometimes use that against you to cancel your particular employment or to cause you a great deal of grief, or eventually, if we have credit scores, which we'll talk about tomorrow with Chuck Bentley, even keep you off the internet or keep you from actually going to a Airbnb or whatever it might be. And so one of the things that we are finding more and more people expressing their concerns about is that if you do look at this legislation being considered, we are talking about the fact that the IRS would now be allowed to review every account that has at least a $600 balance or had more than $600 of transactions within a year. And I'd have to say that unless you're a very special or specific situation, that would mean just about everyone in the listening audience here would then have the IRS looking over their shoulder. Now, when you go to a bank and you write a check, just think about what it would be like knowing that the IRS now is looking over your shoulder when you're doing that. Now, the justification for that, which is always kind of suspect, is that they want to close the tax gap. And I did mention the other day that this idea of a tax gap goes all the way back to about 2009, when then President Barack Obama created a panel to discuss how to close the tax gap. Now, if you believe there is a tax gap, let's first of all help you understand that you can find a lot of articles. Yesterday, I, for example, typed in on Google tax gap myth, because I'd seen some articles like that. Oh, you'll find all sorts of ones, because the argument is that indeed there are some individuals that are engaged in tax avoidance. Yes, sometimes they are using legal means of tax avoidance. And true, there are probably some people that are using illegal means of tax avoidance. But tax gap basically means the difference between what you actually pay the government in taxes and what the government thinks you should pay. Okay, so now we're into a different category, because you've heard the phrase, we want the wealthy to pay their fair share. They probably could have gotten away with this if the minimum wasn't $600. If the minimum, let me just pick a number out of the air, was like $10,000, I think a lot of you go, well, I don't write checks for $10,000, or I don't have $10,000 in my bank. They're just going after the wealthy people, and you probably would not pay attention. But why is it so interesting that they picked a minimum of $600? And I think that illustrates only so well that this has a lot more to do with actually wanting to pry into your life than actually being able to catch tax cheats that might be fairly wealthy. So you might say, well, what would happen? Well, the IRS, as we've pointed out before, hasn't always been just real friendly towards conservative groups or Christian groups. Conservative groups, a good example, matter of fact, when Barack Obama was in office, we found out that the IRS, when it came to those midterm elections, prevented various groups that were kind of, again, sort of tax groups and things like that, from getting a 501c4 designation. But you might say, well, that was a while ago. Okay, what's more recently? Just 2 months ago, we were talking about, with our friend Lathan Watts and others, about an organization he began to be aware of at First Liberty, Christians Engaged. Matter of fact, the head of that actually has been on the program with us before, and they listed their biblical principles for engaging in the political process and praying for leaders. And one of the individuals of the IRS denied them a 501c3 tax-exempt status because, quote, I'm not making this stuff up, their biblical principles seem to align too much with the Republican Party. So that's the first issue. Number two, recognizing that once the IRS has access to all of that data, if you think that data is secure, guess again, because back in June, if you remember, around this program, and I even did a commentary on it, so you can find it on pointofview.net, we found out that the confidential tax records of Jeff Bezos, Mike Bloomberg, Elon Musk and Warren Buffett were released to the public. And as I said at the time, if they can find and release the tax records, and these are just the tax forms, okay? This isn't all the other data, just the tax forms of those individuals who are probably well-protected, wealthy individuals, you, I think, had a pretty good idea what chance do you have. And once that's out there, then it can say, oh, I didn't know that you gave to this political candidate. Well, that's not a good idea. Or you gave to this organization, or maybe I see that you eat entirely too much meat, and so you're not really concerned about the environment, or, all the kinds of things that surface so many times. And lest you think that doesn't happen, I've used the example more than once of Brendan Eich, who was one of the co-founders of Mozilla. You probably are familiar with that, who eventually was forced out of that company. And what was his, if you will, crime? They'd found when they looked through the various contribution records in California when they were considering a state constitutional amendment to define marriage between one man and one woman, that he had contributed to that. And that was enough for them to force him out. You've seen enough of the cancel culture to know exactly what's going on there. So that, I think, is just another good reason why we should be concerned about this issue, and one of the reasons in which we like to bring it to your attention. I thought I'd also mention earlier this week, we talked about, and especially last week, talked about the fact that we starting to see some really interesting things. Senator Joe Manchin's been in the news quite a bit lately, but the other day he made a statement which I picked up on to write a commentary on, because he says we have 11 million jobs that haven't been filled, and we have 8 million people unemployed. Something's not matching up here, you think? And, of course, it's real easy to say that it's just simply due to the $300 weekly federal unemployment insurance bonus, but that expired last month. And so that may increase the number of people that might be more inclined to go to work. But I think there are also individuals that don't want to go to work because they're concerned about COVID. Or, as I even point out, maybe some people have just gotten used to not working because of the pandemic and the lockdown. One of the booklets we'll be sending to those of you that are donors to Point of View is this booklet I'm holding up right now called A Biblical Point of View on Money, in which I point out that, since we've lost this whole idea of a Protestant work ethic, of a Christian worldview, sometimes this whole idea of a work ethic has been fading along with the fading of a Christian worldview. So it's a big issue to address. And of course, in my commentary, I also point out that we still have very generous benefits, even welfare benefits that go out there. And so it isn't always that people are lazy or they haven't gotten used to work. Sometimes they're just rational and saying, you know what, I can make more by staying home than I can while going out and getting a job and possibly exposing myself to COVID. So that's another issue that we'll be talking about. And of course, I just wanted to use that to promote the fact that our Biblical View of Money booklet is coming out. And that's one of the many reasons to consider what you might do to support Point of View, so you'll receive those in the mail. Let me just mention one last time for our Dallas listeners, we do have our Building a Legacy dinner tomorrow night. It's at the Hilton Anatole Hotel. If you'd like to know more, go to the website, pointofview.net, and you can register and find out a little bit more right there. We'll take a break, and we have a lot to cover in this next hour, and we'll do so right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
So we're going to get back into some of the issues in the news. And this first segment, let me just call this again Discernment 101, because it is important for us to help you do critical thinking, to apply logic, and to develop discernment. And I have already sort of tipped my hand in the first hour, but let me come back and say that when you see a whistleblower who is given so much attention, first in 60 Minutes, and then testifying in front of Congress, the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and there's hardly a pushback, but is seen as almost a Joan of Arc kind of figure, you got to say, I think they're all on the same team, and that's an important fact. You can, of course, begin to dig in further, and we're going to, but sometimes it's important for you to recognize that some of this was scripted, and if you just simply play along or don't necessarily ask important questions, again, it's very easy to be deceived. Michael Brendan Doherty, for example, said it's really not hard to envision that Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, is going to get the Hollywood treatment soon. She's already provided the origin story. She's offering get radicalized in content online. This is meant to give the story a personal drama, even a relatable one, and everyone seems to have someone in their life who shares some wild conspiracy theories he got from social media platforms. Okay, so far, so good. We recognize that that is still an important issue to pay attention. We know a lot more about her because as she's come forward, we found out that she has given quite a bit to the Democratic Party. She's been a supporter of the Democrats for some time. She is an individual that is tied to an Obama activist. She's actually given and donated to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Doesn't invalidate her testimony, but it is just something to pay attention to. And we wanted to tell you that because you may not hear that when you watch simply the mainstream media. Now, the piece that we've posted here, the first one, is by Glenn Greenwald. Now, again, an individual that on many issues wouldn't agree with us, but I tend to quote some of these individuals who are doing media investigations because they sort of see beneath the veneer. They see the man behind the curtain. And in one of his paragraphs, he said, look, the social media giants hurt America and the world, this narrative maintains, by permitting misinformation to spread, presumably more so than cable outlets and mainstream newspapers do virtually every week. Yeah, a little bit of satire, a little bit of irony here. But anyway, let's go on. He says, fostering body image neurosis in young girls through Instagram, presumably more so than fashion magazines, Hollywood, the music industry, and the glorification of young, perfectly sculpted bodies. You can see where he's placing his tongue in cheek pretty good here. That these social media giants also are promoting and polarizing political content in order to keep their citizenry engaged, balkanized, and resentful, therefore more eager to stay engaged, presumably in contrast to corporate media outlets, which would never do such a thing. Again, he's having a lot of fun at the expense of some of the testimony, and worst of all, by failing to significantly and sufficiently censor political content that contradicts liberal orthodoxies and diverges from decreed liberal truth. On Tuesday, Haugen's star took turn to Washington. She spent the day testifying before the Senate about Facebook's dangerous refusal to censor even more content and ban even more users than they already do. Are you starting to get the idea? Again, if there was an equal banning of wackos and radicals on both sides, we take it a little more seriously, but nevertheless, that's the case. About the third page there, I'll just pick out one more of his quotes. He points out that none of the swooning over this new Facebook heroine, nor any of the other media assaults on Facebook have anything remotely to do with genuine concern about those genuine dangers. Congress has taken no steps to curb the influence of the Silicon Valley giants because Facebook and Google drowned the establishment wings of both parties with enormous amounts of cash and pay well-connected lobbyists who are friends and former colleagues of key lawmakers to use their D.C. influence to block reform. With the exception of a few stalwarts, and I can certainly mention their names in a few minutes if you'd like, neither party's ruling wing really has any objection to this monopolistic power as long as it's exercised to advance their own interest. And that is Facebook's only real political problem. Not that they are too powerful, but they are not using their power enough to censor enough content from the internet that offends the sensibilities and beliefs of Democratic Party leaders and their liberal followers who now control the White House, the entire executive branch in both houses of Congress. He goes on and makes some other really powerful arguments, but again, the point I'm making is not that I think some of the things she brought up aren't of concern. They are. As a matter of fact, let's recognize that when she actually graduated from Harvard and joined the company, she worked in Facebook's civil integrity wing, which no longer exists from what I understand. And of course, the argument she made is I got involved because someone I was incredibly close to, who is really important to me, I lost them to misinformation on the internet, and I never want anyone to feel the pain that I felt. She points out in 2016, he was a little disillusioned after Bernie Sanders lost the nomination. He was susceptible to misinformation on the internet. He got really, really radicalized. I don't blame Facebook for what happened to him. I blame more 4chan and Reddit. But he started making crazy claims about George Soros running the world economy, things like that. And it was super easy to invalidate, but nevertheless, these kind of sent him off the deep end. And so that's, of course, why she has actually been addressing those issues. Let me just mention that one of the other booklets that we talk about here at Point of View is on social media, and half of that section really deals with social media censorship. And we're going to even have a new edition coming out, which really will probably focus a little bit more on such issues as social media addiction, but also some more on certainly the idea of manipulation. But also in the social media piece, a good warning that I might pass on to you is something that we talked about yesterday. My commentary yesterday was entitled Digital Divide, and the reason I did that a while back was to simply point out that we do have a little bit of a digital divide between those individuals that have good internet and those that do not. And that surfaced, of course, with the lockdown that took place with the online education. But the real digital divide, and that was the title of this piece by Naomi Schaefer-Riley in the New York Times, was the damage that happens because of certain individuals, and oftentimes that tends to be more disadvantaged individuals, minority individuals, but not exclusively, but certainly those kids, but even sometimes the middle-class kids that are just simply harmed by too much screen time. And you heard me when we were doing the interview with Anne Graham-Lotz last hour to mention that the surveys that have come out, the Kaiser Family Foundation, for example, figured that probably 10 hours of basically media input, essentially screen time, screens which would be a cell phone or a smartphone or a video phone, or it could be a video screen, or it could be a movie screen or a computer screen, 10 hours a day. It's very obvious that that much screen time is not going to lead to better education. So this is one of the reasons why, yes, we should be concerned about Facebook. One, because there's entirely too much time people spend on it, but also because the real call these days is to censor even more information. Let's take a break. Got a lot more to cover right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the crime rate is up in many cities, so maybe it's time to consider a solution rarely suggested. Let's see what faith-based organizations and people of faith can do. The evidence is that it can reduce the crime rate and the recidivism rate in our prisons. This is the argument Baylor University criminologist Byron Johnson makes in his book, More God, Less Crime. Sadly, most social scientists and even criminologists seem reluctant to make the connection between faith and the impact religious perspectives could have on America's crime problem. Dr. Johnson believes that a faith-based ministry or message doesn't resonate with most social scientists. Many are even hostile to religion, as demonstrated by the opening chapter in his book entitled The Last Acceptable Prejudice. Dr. Johnson also says that faith-based organizations were merely tolerated within the criminal justice system. In some places, they're seen as valuable and even helpful. In other jurisdictions, they're viewed with suspicion. This is unfortunate since the criminal justice system is facing cutbacks and shrinking budgets. Prison ministries like Bill Glass, Prison Fellowship, and Kairos Prison Ministry can provide people and programs that can make a difference. Faith-based organizations of all kinds can provide volunteers and educators to help with programs in life skills and adult education. The book is full of positive examples of what can happen when Christians get involved in their local community. He tells the story of the Boston Miracle, where police and pastors worked together to break the stranglehold gangs had in the community. He also talks about the mission of the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise and Violence-Free Zones. He even gives practical advice on the important issues of prisoner reentry and aftercare. Most importantly, he provides a review of the literature so that churches and faith-based organizations can show skeptics that the title of the book is true: More God, Less Crime. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's see if we can put two different items together. And if you don't see the irony, well, I'm going to do the best I can, because at a time when there are a number of individuals expressing real outrage as to what happened to Senator Sinema, we talked about this yesterday. She's, again, a Democratic senator from the state of Arizona, being followed into a bathroom and being harassed. By the way, that's not the only incident, by the way, that we can get into, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. And at the same time, when people are still talking about this, you have the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, now putting out a memo calling for an attempt to prevent any kind of intimidation that might take place at a school board meeting. And if you don't see that there is a bit of an irony in, on the one hand, not even having a statement about the fact that a sitting senator was treated so roughly, then turning right around and issuing a memorandum to actually call for the FBI to be involved with working with state and local officials to deal with some of the parents that maybe go a little bit overboard with some of the things they say at a school board meeting. You really don't understand what is taking place. So my second article, first of all, acknowledges that sometimes some of this has gotten a little bit out of hand. And of course, you can see that when you look at what has happened to the senator, and of course, what has happened in many of these school board meetings. Now, why are parents protesting. Sometimes they're protesting over mask mandates. Usually they're protesting over the teaching of critical race theory or the indoctrination of various kind of political ideas, the promotion of LGBTQ issues. Oftentimes they're protesting just unbelievably sexually explicit material, which when they then decide to read it out loud at a school board meeting are actually told to stop talking about this, stop using those words in public, and never seeing the irony that these are the kinds of words and phrases that the kids are reading every single day. So first of all, let me just give David French, who we think very highly of, his due. And if you read his piece, which is entitled Personal Harassment is Out of Control, he makes a couple of points, and I'm going to summarize them in 3 points. If you want to take the notes, here's something you can number 1 to 3. Number 1, we're playing with fire. As he says, as I wrote at length on Sunday, American polarization is reaching a dangerous point. And he gave us the same numbers that I mentioned yesterday. But if you weren't listening, let's look at them again. A poll that came from the University of Virginia says that a majority of Trump voters, that'd be 52%, want to split the nation. They want to secede. And almost a majority of Biden voters, 41%, feel the same way. So 52% of Trump voters, 41% of Biden voters, that leads to the issue of secession. I talked about that yesterday. It's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen. And yet it illustrates again the incredible polarization and division that exists in our countries. That's point number 1. Point number 2, we're deterring decent people from public service. I am here to tell you, I had lunch with an individual that is thinking about running for office, and she was expressing, having already been in office, all the hassles that she's already faced as a publicly elected official, and now wondering, do I dare take one step higher now and run for the legislature in this particular case? And the amount of concern and fear from a person who's already a public servant illustrates even more so why other people looking at the abuse that you face right now at a school board level, city council level, if you run for mayor, run for state legislature, run for Congress, oh my goodness. And the bottom line, by the way, is that at least at the higher levels, you have some protection. You really don't have any. And that is something is really starting to concern some people as well. It only takes some wacko that disagrees with you following you to your car to make you wonder whether or not this is the thing that you want to do in the future. And again, some of you that have never experienced it, here's something that'll wake you up. When I come home one time, this is years ago, and my wife tells me that we got a death threat by phone. Well, of course, we have an unlisted number now, but it's still pretty easy for people to get a hold of you. And it's a eye-opening situation when your wife says they've actually threatened to kill us because they don't like what we had to say. And so that's something that you have to pay attention to as well in terms of this incredible polarization. And the third point he makes is we're systemically inflicting profound moral injuries on our fellow citizens. Of course we are, this idea of threat and harassment. In his article, he goes through and gives some examples. And by the way, most of the examples, do tend to come from the left. But again, because he likes to play it down the middle, he did post this one piece, comes from a number of QAnon activists that were at a school board meeting in Iowa. When these various school board members were leaving, they shouted out, "We know where you live. We're coming to your house." Which, again, you should never say in a public meeting, because that just raises the level of anxiety, and that is something you should not say and you should not do. But even as I was looking at that, I was thinking, yes, there is certainly wrong to say, we know where you live and we're coming to your house. How about the people that already have protesters that have come to their house? Well, let's talk about United States members of the Supreme Court. There have been people outside the house of Brett Kavanaugh for quite some time. There were all sorts of protesters that came outside of the house of Justice Clarence Thomas. they tend to be more on the conservative side, and guess who came to their house and protested them? How about people in the political realm? Well, that would be, Governor Scott Walker, when he was a governor in Wisconsin. Actually came to his house, but he was in the mansion. They didn't even know. Oh, yeah, he's not in his house. He's in the governor's mansion, which just shows you how stupid some of these people are. Anyway, Senator Mitch McConnell, all the things happening outside of his house. And, of course, we have Senator Kyrsten Sinema. And, by the way, if you're in the media, have you ever seen the stories about Tucker Carlson? I mean, I've heard they were even talking about moving. I couldn't document that. I think they did, though. And they were saying that they tried to break down the door, and then the next day there's an article saying, no, I was there. We just put stuff on the front of the door. It's like, yeah, well, okay, you and the police have a different view of what actually took place, and it's a good illustration of that. So, again, I do believe that this issue of personal harassment has gotten out of hand. But let's just for a few minutes get back to what the Attorney General has done. Andrew McCarthy's been on the program with us before and, of course, has been a federal prosecutor, said even as President Biden shrugged his shoulders over the progressives' harassment and intimidation of a sitting U.S. senator of his own party, which is, by the way, a crime under Arizona law, Biden's Justice Department was running roughshod over the First Amendment, he says, threatening to investigate and prosecute parents for protesting against school boards and teachers who insist on indoctrinating children with the cultural Marxism beloved by Democrats. On Monday, he says, the Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a memorandum in which he wailed about the disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence against school administrators, board members, teachers, and staff, clearing his throat with an empty nod to the inconvenient fact that the Constitution protects spirited debate. Merrick Garland incorrectly, indeed outrageously for some of his experience at the Justice Department, claimed that free speech principles yield not only to threats of violence, but also to efforts to intimidate individuals, unless your name, as he points out, is Sinema or Mention, and then it's okay. And he says Garland knows this is dangerous nonsense. I personally know that he knows it. He was a high-ranking official in the Clinton Justice Department, which gave me a very hard time, though untimely relented, when I proposed changing notorious terrorists and charging notorious terrorists with soliciting acts of violence and seditious conspiracy. So Andrew McCarthy knows he knows what he's saying, but he's knowing that he's going to do it anyway. The editors of National Review said the United States Department of Justice has no business, none, even thinking of involving itself in the give and take between parents and school administrators. Questions related to the teaching and contents of K-12 curriculum are the domain of state and local governance and ultimately a matter of robust democratic debate. The new memorandum, he says, interestingly enough, is clearly meant to send a message to one side of that debate, the ones who have been showing up at school board meetings to protest critical race theory and trans radicalism. Garland's memo cynically conflates parents' dissent against progressive educational indoctrination with threats of violence against school administrators, board members, teachers, and staff, the public servants who run state school systems. And so, again, there are a lot of people protesting what indeed was done by the Justice Department. But we need to take a break. When we come back, I'd love to get your thoughts. Maybe you've been at one of these school board meetings, can give us some testimony. Maybe you have some thoughts about that. If not, we're going to move on to some other topics, but just wanted to let you know that we've posted some of these articles for you to read on the website at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, let's see if we can get into a couple of other stories, and this one is the third article, and it is something that is so significant that I was receiving other emails about it, and I said, well, this is the one we already had planned to post, and it's as good as any of the others. You will find quite a few, and that is we now have a grant proposal that has been leaked. Now, to be fair, the grant proposal was never approved, but look at this. It was a grant proposal which actually would allow Chinese scientists and American scientists to create a novel coronavirus. Okay, what does that mean? Well, then it, provides even more evidence that indeed maybe the virus came from Wuhan and maybe it came from gain-of-function research. What do you think? Nah, no, couldn't possibly be that. I mean, we've had the intelligence community say we can't really figure out where it came from. Lancet, as I announced just the other day, which is the premier medical journal of the UK, said, no, we've just given up trying to figure out where this came from. Oh, and of course, we found no animals that have a virus sequence, a genomic sequence that's even close to that. I'll get to that in just a minute. And again, if you have a science background, you would appreciate this. But the first 2 pages, you don't have to have any background in science to understand it only so well, because this, again, illustrates what we've always thought, that this incredible amount of death and disease that has taken place all over the world goes all the way back to a failed experiment. Maybe an experiment out of control, maybe a leak, maybe intentional. Can't figure that out, but we, of course, can't even identify whether it even really came from Wuhan Institute of Virology or it came from a wet market. I think we know the answer to that. But let's get to the article. And then that also brings me to another piece by Matt Tabibi, in which he's pointing out this new drug that Merck is talking about now, which I think is kind of interesting. Everybody's supposed to take the shot. Well, what if I take this pill? Oh, no, you got to take the shot. What if I have natural immunity? No, you got to take the shot. Well, anyway, we'll get to that in just a minute. But let's go to this one. First of all, the World Health Organization has reviewed a coronavirus research grant and it unearthed last month, and it confirmed that the language of the document does suggest that American scientists and Chinese scientists plan to collaborate on the creation of a new coronavirus not found in nature. What a surprise. The grant proposal was obtained by a particular group called Drastic, which is submitted to the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. That's called DARPA, if you're not familiar, in conjunction with, of course, EcoHealth. We've talked about them before, an American research nonprofit, and that they would work with the scientists, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, to create a new virus using this funding. The grant says we will compile sequence RNA data from a panel of closely related strains and compare full-length genomes, scanning for various kinds of sequencing errors, and then they will recover recombinant viruses. I don't need to know all the science there other than the fact that we're going to be creating some of these things. And this would then allow them to synthesize genome, which is the genetic structure, the DNA, from this computer sequence, and then create it, and then create a genome, create a virus that has never been found in nature, but looks natural enough because it's looking like, structurally, like some of the natural viruses that we find. Does that not, from a genetics point of view, molecular biological point of view, describe what we are dealing with right now? Of course it is. Now, again, to be fair, if you read into the second page, it talks about the fact that while the grant was never approved, it provides further evidence that American scientists and Chinese scientists were exploring this issue of gain-of-function research, in which scientists manipulate existing viruses to make them more transmissible or dangerous. And some of these other proposals, which again come from EcoHealth Alliance, which we've talked about before, also suggest that they were heavily involved in gain-of-function research. Well, what does that mean? Can you remember the testimony that you had from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who, of course, leads the NIH Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, the highest paid person in the federal government? Can you remember the back and forth with him with Dr. Rand Paul, in which he denied in congressional testimony that any U.S. funding went to gain-of-function research? That may be what we might call true but misleading, because if indeed they did not fund it, it does illustrate that somebody was talking about that. So, interesting enough, in an interview in the Telegraph, one source from the World Health Organization suggested that artificial lab engineering could explain why there is such a close match between the virus, which has the technical name SARS-CoV-2, and why we could not find it in nature. As you may know, we've talked on this program many times before about the fact that they have brought in all sorts of animals, including bats and pangolins and others, and don't find anything that close. What they do find is one strain that is maybe shares the genome in about 96% of the genome. But if the virus were to have any kind of direct ancestor, it would at least be like 99.98% match, and that is not the case. So we've never found anything like it in nature, and perhaps that's because it was created in the laboratory in the first place. Where would that laboratory be located? Just a lucky guess. Maybe the Wuhan Institute of Virology. If we now come to this new COVID-19 drug. We did mention it Friday, and Dr. Merrill Matthews mentioned it. I wish I had him here right now because it has a name for the drug that's almost unpronounceable, but let's see if I can give it a try here. And that is molnupiravir. And that probably is about as close as you're going to get from me today. But what this is a drug that is a pill, which seems like a very good way to begin to address some of those issues of when individuals who maybe do have COVID could actually take this Merck pill, which so far looks like it is really very effective. Again, I'll give you the numbers. Of 385 patients who got the drug, 28 or 7.3% were hospitalized, compared with 53 out of 377 who got the placebo. Although through day 29, no deaths were reported in patients who received that drug, but 8 died on the placebo arm. So even now, you're starting to see headlines saying, Dr. Fauci sees hope in the new Merck drug. And so this is encouraging, because if we are going to have something that will be a treatment or a therapeutic, a good idea. But then you have the former assistant for preparedness and response at the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Robert Cadillac, saying, wait a minute. We had this a long time ago, and if we had actually had this out 6 months ago, it would have saved tens of thousands of lives. Well, what happened? Culture wars, because the story about the way in which it was supposed to be approved really ran into a major roadblock, and that was when this was happening during the Trump administration. When Donald Trump was president, you can remember the reaction to hydroxychloroquine, and so this federal whistleblower is saying that indeed he was prevented from actually doing some of the kinds of tests because there was such a pushback against Donald Trump. Agree or disagree with why he went out of his way to talk about the value of hydroxychloroquine, but because of that, this one certainly went down the same kind of, if you will, rabbit hole, because there was such a push against. You've got to remember, this time last year, there were still some people wondering whether or not they would even take the vaccine. There were certainly a lot of people saying that all these statements about hydroxychloroquine and, well, even to this day, ivermectin and some of those are so controversial, and I think gives you a very good idea of the fact that this, which could have been released months ago, is only coming out now. And this is why at least one of these doctors say if we hadn't had all of the politics and essentially even the culture wars in terms of the anti-Trump bias, this could have saved tens of thousands of lives. Now, if the drug does turn out to prevent death and not insignificant portion of those lives were lost, as it says, for its arrival. And that loss will be on the backs of the politicians and the press that had such an anti-Trump idea about any of these therapeutics. And so we'll learn a little bit more over the next couple of days. But I think Matt Taibbi is reminding us that we can't always assume that everything is going to follow the natural scientific line. Instead, sometimes politics, policy, turf wars, the culture war might actually be responsible for an increased number of deaths when this could have been available a long time ago. Well, let's take a break. I think we've got some people that would like to express their opinion. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, let's take some phone calls. Let me just mention that earlier we, of course, talked about the whole issue of the Facebook whistleblower, and that is a significant story and in the news right now. And, of course, we've also talked about the attempt from the Attorney General and the Department of Justice to crack down on parents. And as important those stories are, I think the ones I just mentioned in terms of this leaked grant proposal confirming that a Chinese scientist and American scientists were planning to create a novel coronavirus, and then the story about the Merck drug. Those might even be more blockbuster, and I suspect you probably heard both of those right here on Point of View because they're pretty new stories, and I hope that's one more reason why you might consider what you would do to support this ministry. Let's go to the phones, though. We'll start in Texas, KCCT, and Pete, you are on. I'd like to hear what you have to share.
Yes, that kind of brought me back some way back in the 60s, late 60s, probably early 70s. I was sitting in the library reading a magazine called Mechanics Illustrated.
Oh, sure.
And in that article, there was an article there about China at that time coming together with the Americans, and I can't remember what other countries, and it was like $8 billion that was going to be put into this test. But they were going to try to get a virus to be connected with a circuit even at that time. And it caught my attention. And it might be good to go back maybe and look it up, and see how they've been at this thing for many, many years.
Well, again, got to love a guy that reads things like Popular Mechanics and everything else, because that is certainly the case. Let me check that out, because I was unaware of that, but they were talking about ways that it could be a delivery system. And, of course, with nanotechnology, all sorts of things certainly could be done. So, Pete, I appreciate you calling in today, and I hope you call again.
Yes, sir. Bye.
Let's, if we can, pick up another phone call real quickly. We'll go to Georgia. Shelby, what would you like to add to our conversation today? Do we have Shelby? Yeah, maybe not. Guess not. Well, we thought we'd give it a try anyway. Let me just, before we run out of time, mention a couple of other things. We have been working our way through some of these articles, and one that I didn't get to, and it is the fourth article, which probably will postpone till tomorrow, but let's at least give attention to it, and that is from Rich Lowry about whether or not we should arm Taiwan. If you're not familiar, and I haven't really talked about this much, it'd be good to get Gordon Chang on as well to talk about this, because now the number of incursions of China into Taiwan have increased dramatically. Now, those of you that actually donate to Point of View, again, another justification and reason for why you should donate to Point of View, we just more recently did an Outlook magazine on China, in which I pointed out that I still believe, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I still believe that China is going to do what it can to take Taiwan. Will they do it now? Maybe not. They might wait till after the Olympics in China, but this is certainly the case, and China has been involved in these incursions, and you had 52 Chinese flights on Monday that brought the total number of incursions into Taiwan's airspace up to 145, already the year's highest monthly total, and we're only in the first few days of October, so you can kind of figure out that something is not good. And Rich Lowry points out that these flights have been steadily increasing. I think there is an attempt to, in some respects, see if the Chinese can wear down the Taiwanese by forcing them to constantly respond. But even if they're not trying to wear them down, they can see what the response would be so they can counter-program to it as well. And so the goal, and there's no hesitation, no ambiguity about the goal. The goal is for China to eventually successfully absorb Taiwan while limiting the military, economic, and diplomatic cost that this would happen. And, of course, the impact that this would have would be really very devastating in the world because, first of all, you would have to see that the consequences nationwide from a diplomatic point of view would be very difficult. By having, of course, Taiwan, it's like having an aircraft carrier you don't have to have maintenance for by having Americans there as well. By having control of Taiwan, that would have to reorient the defense posture of the United States. And there is some question, of course, as to whether or not the current president would even respond appropriately in this regard. And so then you also have to understand that when we talk about the economic consequences, I pointed out before, so many of those chips those computer chips, the ones we don't have right now, which is why in some cases used cars are actually selling for more than new cars. If you can find a new car, because there aren't many chips out there available for those cars, this would just make a disaster even worse. If you think we have a problem right now with a supply chain situation, just think about what is going on there. So we have posted this article about Rich Lowry, who makes the case we should arm Taiwan to the teeth. His argument is that we can't, as Americans, afford to lose Taiwan. We can't afford to allow, obviously, China to have Taiwan, and yet I don't see any willingness on the part of this president, who seems to be very tied to China, especially through his son, to make the kind of changes necessary. And so we will see what that actually entails. But again, invading and occupying Taiwan after launching maybe a amphibious operation across the 110-mile strait would be no small feat. But if indeed China is willing to take casualties, willing to lose costs, willing to lose even any kind of international prestige because of it, I think they would do it. My only argument would be that they might wait until at least after the Olympics because of the diplomatic impact that it might have. But we'll maybe come back to that in the future, because I think that's an issue that we will certainly need to address. Let me just real quickly, before I run out of time, mention a couple of things. Of course, the first article here, which is a very good piece about the Facebook revelation. Don't disagree with some of the statements that Frances Haugen makes about what is going wrong with Facebook, but I do believe that the fact that she has been given what we oftentimes refer to as Hollywood treatment illustrates that the people asking the questions, whether it's 60 Minutes or whether in the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, aren't necessarily disagreeing with her and see this as a great way to begin to increase even more censorship on Facebook. So that first article gives you a little bit of that background. I wanted you to know that as much as we disagree around the table, and we'll certainly be talking about on Friday, this memorandum from the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who is, of course, the Attorney General, and calling for the FBI to be involved in a crackdown on parents. As much as we disagree with the memorandum, I've also posted this piece by David French reminding us that personal harassment really is out of control. And then we've been talking about some of the things having to do with the virus and even this new kind of wonder drug from Merck, as well as, of course, this issue from Taiwan. So those are articles we've posted on the website, and I encourage you to take the time to find those articles. You might print them out, might send them on to others, post them on your Facebook page or Twitter feed, and most importantly, educate yourself. That's what we're trying to do here at Point of View. As you go there, I hope you might click on the button that says donate. You've probably heard a few things today you've heard nowhere else but here. And if you value that source of news, information, and commentary, we would certainly welcome your financial support. We did have a truth team in which we did okay, but we could certainly use your financial support. If you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate it. I want to thank Andrew for his help as an engineer, Steve for his help as a producer. Hope you will join us tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.